In Unit 9, we're going to look at extrema. We're going to talk about today relative and absolute extrema on an interval. It's going to be a lot of definitions, but it's important that we understand these terms and the differences and similarities between them. So yeah, we want to understand what a relative extrema is versus an absolute extrema. Okay, so first, definition. So f is defined on an interval I containing some point c. Okay. So then f of c is an absolute minimum of f on the interval I if f of c is less than or equal to f of x for all values of x in the interval I. F of c is the absolute maximum of f on the interval I if f of c is greater than or equal to f of x on all x in the interval I. Really, this is just both of these are formal definitions for saying this is the lowest value. So at some point C, the y value, f of c, is lower than every other y value, or equal to. So think about what that means. If you have a horizontal line, everything is the absolute minimum, or everything is the absolute maximum as well. So maximums and minimums are what we call extrema. All right, so we're going to hear that word extrema a lot. We've seen that before. We talked about this first semester, where polynomials have n minus 1 possible terms, which are also then extrema. So we've seen that word before, but now we're going to be using it with derivatives. Next, we have what we call the extreme value theorem. So if f is continuous on the closed interval a to b, then f has both a minimum and a maximum on that interval. And when we're talking about minimum maximum here, we're talking about absolute. Remember, closed interval just means that we're using brackets, so that means we include the endpoint, as opposed to open interval, which we'll see in a little bit, is parentheses, which means we do not include the endpoint. Another definition, this is already on your page or on your packet. So if there is an open interval containing some point c on which f of c is a maximum, then f of c is called a relative maximum of f. So the difference here is that we're specifically talking about an open interval. Okay, so with an absolute extrema, we were talking about a closed interval. Now we're talking about an open interval. If there is an open interval containing c on which f of c is a minimum, then f of c is called a relative minimum. Another thing to think about with this is also hinting at us that a relative minimum and an absolute minimum, or a relative maximum and an absolute maximum, can be the same location depending on the scenario. All right, so we want to understand absolute maximums and minimums are the highest or the lowest point on a graph. It can be an open or a closed interval. A relative maximum or minimum is the highest or lowest point on an open interval. So that's really the difference.